We are looking today at the Centari 610 series base coat and the 600 series base coat today. We are not looking at the high production 6000 series today, as that is a different paint mixing ratio and a little bit different technical information. Now, I know for some of you that the mixing ratios can be a little bit daunting, a little bit like this. We will be doing a summary first before going into some more details on how to a little bit later in the video. But otherwise, let's get into some of it now. The two types of labels you're looking for. This is the first type. In this case, it says Centari 610, but it could say Centari 600. And here is the paint mixing ratio. So if you're not sure, it's there. We've done an older label. Here. There's Centari 610 600 series. It also has on the paint label. And then on there's the paint mixing ratios. Kapow! There's only so much information you can put on a label, so be sure to check out the actual technical data sheets rather than hear me waffle. And that should hopefully be a link to our, below a link to our website. Otherwise, in the little description below in the comment section, hopefully you can expand that out and fast forward some of the times or skip ahead. And along the way, there should be some videos that if you wanted to have a look at there. Otherwise, a quick summary. The 600 series and the 610 series, the mixing ratio is the same. That is 1 part paint to 0.8 part thinners, or 1 liter of paint, 1000 mils of paint to 800 mils of thinners. For those that are wanting to activate the base coat, you're looking at 10% of your BK220 into your paint first at a 10%, and then using the activated base coat as a 1 part paint to 0.8 part thinners. But if that confuses you, I'll be going through that later on. The coverage, you're looking for the 610 series base coat, looking roughly as a guide about 3 coats for coverage and about 5-6 minutes between each coat. Does depend on the weather and a couple other things. And then Centari 600 series, you're looking at 2 coats roughly for coverage, and again about 5-6 minutes between each coat. And we do make a bunch of assumptions too, so there's too many to list, but a couple of them is you're using the right thinners, you're using the right color primer, and if you're not sure what that means or what value shade, check out a previous video, and conventional 1.3, 1.4, but otherwise a look at that. Once your base coat's dried off and it's eggshelled off, I like to leave it about 40 minutes before I like to put my 2-pack clear on, and I don't like to leave my base coat to cure any longer than 3 hours before putting my clear coat on. I have my reasons, but that's up to you. Otherwise, I think that's all the information that you need, and let's move on to some more detailed work on how to do and how to use your mixing ratios. There's 2 ways of measuring paint. It's either by weight or by volume. The first way, unfortunately, you do need software to go with that and a good accurate pair of scales. Unfortunately, people don't have access to that unless they have a system. What we can do for you, we can print out off a sheet with the weights on there. So if you're wanting a more accurate representation of what you need to do, then that's the way to go. The second way is by volume, using things like mixing cups or mixing sticks. So we're going to be delving into that a little bit more today on what to use and how to do it. And so let's get into it. Mixing cups. The mixing ratios for the non-activated base coat is what we're looking at now, at a ratio of 1 part paint to 0.8 part thinners, or a 5:4 ratio. Unfortunately, I haven't found a mixing cup or a mixing stick with that ratio on there. So what we're going to be using is we're going to look at 3 methods that are possible to use. The first one is not as accurate, and that is using the 1:1 mixing ratio and using that as a 1:0.8 ratio. So I'll cover that one in a second. The second 2 are more accurate options, and I use these. That's if I don't have a program to do the weighted version, and hopefully you find that these methods might be of some use to you. The mixing cup here, sometimes people make the mistake and they look on the outside of this here and they go, oh look, there's a 1 to 0.8. No, that is an 8 to 1. So just be a little bit careful of which way that you're looking at the mixing cup, and we will be flipping the image in a second, so that way we can deal with the ratio here. And as you can see, it's a 1:1 and it'll be flipped. Now that the image has been flipped, you can see the 1:1 ratio a little bit more clearly. And each one of these numbers here, 1 for 1, 2 for 2, are the correlation of the paint to the thinners at a 1:1 ratio, but we're not looking at the last column. And today we're looking at the 5. So we're going to be adding the paint to the top of the 5 here, and then adding the thinners up to the 5, the second here, but only 80%. And you can see on the left hand side the volume, but the first line here, the 5, is the paint. You're adding it up to here, to the 5, and then that is your paint, and then adding the thinners. Now you do have to add the right thinners, and in this case we are using the XB383, and there's good reason for using the right thinners. And as we're doing this as a 1:1, we're only wanting to go 1 to 0.8, so only 80% of that last little volume there. And you can see it's a bit of a approximation or a bit of a guess, and getting the accuracy can be a bit hard, so I'm going to put a little bit of thinners into a cup so I can have a bit more control, just to add a little bit more slowly rather than trying to get it out of the bigger tin. And there you have it. And then give it a good mix. We are using the calibrated cup here, but we're using the little increments on the side of the cup here rather than the ratio. And what you want to also do is grab a pen, grab yourself a couple of sheets of paper or a pad and a calculator. We'll be going through that a little bit later or in a minute. And I've already done the calculations and written them down. So I'd suggest you do this next part initially. Otherwise, we'll go through this as along the way. What we'll want to look at is we've got 300 ml cup here, and we don't want to overflow the paint and the thinners and make it go everywhere. So we want to make sure that we keep within the cup as well as a little bit of an area to mix up. So when you're doing your 300 mils of up here, you divide that by 2. The paint itself is a 1 to 0.8, but it is just shy of 1 to 1 or shy of 50-50. So that way, if we do a half of that, we know we've got room in there to add the thinners without it overflowing. Most people will find it easier to calculate paint in 100 ml increments. It's just a little easier to calculate in your head. So if you're wanting to make a larger amount, you can just get a bigger cup and work with 100 ml increments. Just bear in mind, don't exceed the halfway mark, otherwise you will find that the paint will overflow. Otherwise, for the sake of calculations, let's go back to the 350 ml cup and work with a calculator how to calculate volumes from there. So you grab your calculator if you are too tired to think. Go 300 divided by 2, which is 150, and that is 150 ml of paint. So if you're not sure, you can write that down, and we are going to add in 150 ml of paint to here, and then 150 ml of paint, we times it by 0.8, and that will give us our amount of thinners that we need. So it's 120, and we can get a separate cup and put the 120 and then combine it together, or otherwise we can go 150 plus your 120 of your thinners equals 270. So each of these little increments are 25, so we're wanting to go up to your 270. Well, it's actually 275 on there, but we can go to just shy of the 275, right the way up to 270. Now hopefully I've flipped the image in the camera over there so you can see what I've done, and then of course we can mix up the paint. Now this paint was already thoroughly stirred and I'm not using the scales, so don't freak out if you see the scales there. I've just done the little increments on the side, and there we go. Hopefully that has helped. I was playing around a little bit in the video editing software and had a couple of the guys look at this next segment. And a few of them wanted me to break the mixing ratios down a little bit more details on how that mixing ratios work. So let's look at the paint to thinner ratio first, and that is a 1 to 0.8. You can write it this way or you can write it this way. So let's look at a 1 to 1 ratio. Now that could be a 1 part paint to 1 part hardener, or in this case, It doesn't really matter. It could be one part paint to 1 part thinners, but you're looking at a part A and part B. So an equal size. So you got 1 part here and the second part there, but you can see that there is equal sizes. They are equal sizes here. So 1 part and 1 part, which gives us a total of 2 parts in this formula. Or we can look at a 2 to 1, and you can see that the parts are the same. You're looking at 2 parts of the same and 1 part of the same, which gives us a grand total of 3 parts in this mixing ratio. Or you're looking at a 4 to 1, say for instance a clear, and there's 5 parts to that mix. So you've got 4 parts of your clear as an example, and 1 part of your hardener. So let's go back down to the 1 to 1 ratio and looking at the 2 equal parts here of 1 to 1, but we're looking at the thinner ratio of 1 to 0.8. So that means 1 part here, but you're looking at the 0.8, it's not the same size, so it is 0.8, which gives us a grand total of 1 to 0.8, which is 1.8 parts. So hopefully that when it comes to mixing ratios and calculating mixing ratios, that this next segment will make a little bit more sense to you. So with this method, we're looking at doing a calculation because we want a specific volume of mixed paint. So as an example, we have a 600 ml cup here, but we're only wanting a 350 ml mixed paint. So how do we calculate that out to get that amount? We might want it for some reason. We've got a small job and that's how much we calculated it out. We only want 350 mils. So what you need, pen, paper, here, something to write on, and a calculator. I've already done the calculations and written them down, but let's go through this anyway. So your mixing ratio is 1 part paint to 0.8 part thinners. Add those 2 together, bear with me. So 1 plus your 0.8 is 1.8 parts in the total mix. So what you do, we want 350 mils. So you go 350 into your calculator for 350 mils. So 350 divided by 1.8. That should give our paint amount. And that should be 194.4 approximately. And we're going to round that up to 195. So write down 194.4 or 195 round figures. So we get our paint. Now I've already stirred this paint and we're not using the scales or any of the screens. And shout out to a previous video of a paint pourer. So if you don't have one of those, just don't pour over the paint label or the mixing ratio. So we're going to go and put our paint up to 194.4 or 195, which is just shy of your 200 mils of paint. So let's put that in. 194.4, roughly about there. Now don't think 194 mils equals 194 grams. No, it doesn't, because the weight of paint is different depending on the color, and thinners of course is a little bit different as well. So let's move on. We've got 194, that gives us a 1 part of your paint. So to identify your thinners, it's 194.4 or 195 multiplied by 0.8. And that should give us our thinner volume, which is 155. So you add those 2 together and there you go, bang, that's 350 mils. You don't need to do that second calculation, but it is helpful if you wanted to just double check that you got your right amount. So we got 194 of your paint already, and we put our 155, which will bring it all up to a 350 mil mix. There we go, and let's give that a good stir, and hopefully you have found that makes sense. Activating the base coat, or why would you activate a base coat? Well, look, there's a few different reasons. If you really want a good adhesion from the base color to, or your base coat to your clear coat, that's a good reason. If you're doing things like a 3-layer pearlescent, perhaps it's a good idea as well. That will help bond each of those layers, and especially to the clear coat. Things that are more prone to chipping, like aluminium bonnets perhaps, or bumpers, or bonnets in general. Otherwise, if you're mixing and changing around different brands, it's probably a good idea for you to activate the base coat. Otherwise, again, a quick little summary, you're looking at 1 part paint or 1 part activated paint to your 0.8 part your thinners, and I'll go through that now. So don't forget, there is 10% of your chip protector or your BK220 in your paint first, but let's cover that now. So dealing with activated base coat is what we are looking at. And we have a 300ml cup here, and we're going to divide that by 2. As I said, it's roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. So we know that at 150 mils, we can't exceed our paint volume beyond that. Now, if you find it this way, well, I find it easier to deal with in 100ml increments. So you find that you're using your paint in 100ml increments. So yes, grab a bigger cup if you're wanting to and deal with the 100ml increments of your paint. It's easier to calculate that in your head, but make sure that you don't exceed the halfway mark of your mixing cup. Otherwise, for the sake of calculations, I'm going to show you in a minute using a calculator of how to do this volume of 300ml cup here using the 150 mils here. So this 150 mils, this is where it gets a little bit more complex, because that 150 mils of paint that we're putting into it, it has to be activated with 10% of your BK220. And what you can do is 150 mils times it by 10%, that's 15 mils. And yes, you could potentially add the 15 mils into of your BK220 in there first, then add your paint up to the 150 mils. Now that's an activated paint. Give it a good stir, then add your thinners up accordingly, which should be 120 mils of thinners. So 120 plus 150 is 270. So you could do that way. Or otherwise, some people don't like doing the activator first because they feel as if it might get stuck on the side. So just for the sake of calculations, we're going to go 150 mils here, because that's where we're looking at, and take 10% on your calculator. So that's 150, take 10%, which is 135. So we're going to put your 135 mils of paint. Now, each one of these increments, sorry, I'm just getting paint everywhere. Each one of these increments is 25 mils. So we're going to go 120, there we go, 125, and we want 135. There we go. And then the 135, we have to add your 15 mils of your BK220 to bring it up to 150. There we go. And we give it a good stir. I want you to stir it better than what I'm about to stir it, but I don't want to lose in the video the little mils on the side of the cup. And then we go 150 times it by 0.8 to get our thinners, which should be 120 mils. Add the 120 mils to your 150, which will be 270. So we're going to add that up to 200, 250, 275, right? Oh, we keep going, 250, 275, just shy of that. There we go. All right, so hopefully that made some kind of sense to you. So you're looking at an actual volume here. 400 mils is what we want for whatever reason. Now, I haven't had my morning coffee, so excuse me if I don't make complete sense, but otherwise we're looking at 400 mils here. And what I suggest you to do is grab a pen, a piece of paper to write onto, and a calculator. And just do these calculations beforehand, so that way you're a little bit more familiar and you know what you're doing, rather than just doing it on the fly, as I'm just going to do. So 400 mils, and we're going to divide it by 1.8, and that will give us our how much paint we need. We need 222 mils. Now, we can't really measure 222 mils on there, so let's just round it up just for the sake of it. Otherwise, if you're wanting to get it more accurate. Now, this is the reason why we like to use scales, and we can give you a printout sheet of the weights themselves. Now, paint doesn't weigh all the same, so don't think you can just weigh 1 mil for 1 mil, or 1 mil for 1 gram, etc. So that's why we do like to use a accurate pair of scales, so we can get it down to a 0.1 of a gram. But otherwise, let's just say we don't have any of that, and all we have is a pen, paper, and a calculator. So 225 mils, that's where we're looking at. Now, 10% of that is activated with a BK220. So 10% of your 225 is your 22.5. So what you can do is firstly add the BK220 at 22.5 into there, and then add your paint up to your 225. So there's 22.5 mils of your BK220, and then add your paint up to your 225. That saves the easiest calculation. And then add your thinners from there, making sure you give it a good stir before you add your thinners. Otherwise, for those that would rather add the paint in there because they're concerned about the activator getting stuck on the side of the cups, let's do it that way first. So we have to have the 225, take your 10%, which is 202.5. So let's just add roughly 202.5. So that will be closest to the 200 mil, right about there. Perfect. And then we get our activator and we add 22.5 mils of activated of the BK220. So let's just add that into that. So 200 plus 22.5, which roughly brings it up to there. So that'll be our 200, and so each one of those increments is 25. So that is right. And let's get back to our calculator. So we have 225 mils there, times it by 0.8, which is your 180. So 180 mils of thinners. Now we don't need the next calculation of the 180 mils because we know we are making a 400 mils. So from there you can just go straight up to your 400 mils. Otherwise, it's always good to check. So your 180 plus your 225 equals your 405. So as I said, it was just slightly rounded figures. So it always pays just to double check that figure anyway. So we're going to add our reducer up to the 405 mark, which is just over the 400 mil mark. All right, I know that you guys don't want to see the top of my head in the video, so I can check that later. Otherwise, hopefully that helped for you to get some actual volumes if you're wanting to go down that way. I wasn't going to add another video, but I thought, well, let's have a look at, sometimes people like seeing color going on. So whether you choose to activate the base coat or you choose not to activate the base coat, I'll leave that up to you. But hopefully in this video, at the end here, you can see in real time application of some color, so you can at least get a feel of distance and speed. Unfortunately, you won't be able to really tell on how much paint I'm putting on there, and in fact applying paint is really another big long video, and this video has already gone on long enough, and I really didn't think it was going to take so long to do either. But otherwise, between coats, I've allowed about 5 minutes in this case. The booth was roughly sitting at about 27 degrees, and you can see it's eggshelled off nicely before I put my second coat down, and I am using a Centari 600 base coat here. Ignore the dent as well, as this particular panel is for another video, so maybe you'll find that in time. Otherwise, in the comment section below, just go down there and expand it out, and hopefully you can like and subscribe as well. And in the comment section, or rather the description section, you'll find links to other videos, so don't forget that. Hopefully you can find your way through. I won't be applying any of the clear coat, as that is, I don't feel as if it's necessary in this particular video. But otherwise, thanks for watching.
Yeah, make sure it's real glossy.